The thing that makes it difficult is because even if life had evolved on Mars, the chances of being preserved are very small. If we use Earth as a reference and our planet is teeming with life, yet it rarely preserves evidence of life of the fossil record. And the focus now is on exploring for habitable environments. If you're looking for water, a source of energy, either solar energy or thermal energy or chemical energy, and then organic carbon, assuming life as we know it on Earth based on carbon. So those are sort of the three things that we're looking for in the course of our mission. Some ecotourism offers visitors close encounters with different species. But new research suggests that these activities may not be so great for the animals. Researchers tagged stingrays in Stingray City, in the Cayman Islands, to monitor their movements and behavior. Compared to stingrays outside of the tourism area, those in Stingray City switched their activity patterns from night to day, when tourists handed out food, and mated year-round instead of seasonally. The stingrays also had more bite marks, which suggests increased aggression towards one another. The study is in the journal PLOS One. Past research has found increased stress and more intra- and interspecies aggression among animals that have been fed by humans. Interactive tourism is a growing business. But researchers say that more study is needed to ensure the health and safety of humans and animals alike. Ecotourism may be good for a given species, as humans become engaged in its survival. But for the individual members of that species tasked with dealing with people, it may not be a walk in the park. Millions of roses get handed out on Valentine's Day. But growing roses has an environmental impact worse than many other crops. Start with climate change. Most roses in the US and Europe are imported from warmer climes. All that flying and trucking adds thousands of metric tons of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. Then there's all the water needed to, well, water the flowers. And the runoff fouled by copious quantities of pesticides needed to make the roses look perfect. There's also the wildlife and workers poisoned by all that fumigation. Add to that habitat destruction where floral plantations displace native forest and wetlands. Finally, there's the refrigeration needed to keep those blooms fresh. The electricity is often produced by burning fossil fuels, and the refrigerant gases also exacerbate climate change. A more sustainable and, possibly, more romantic approach is to go with flowers certified by outfits like Veriflora, or even better, whatever flowers are in season locally. Of course, that's not much help for those of us in wintry climes. Maybe try writing a poem. Let's see, roses are red, violets are blue. Let's say you've saved up 200 grand for a trip to space with Virgin Galactic. Lucky you. But are you healthy enough to fly? You'll have to talk with your doctor. A new study in the BMJ outlines the role that general practitioners will have to play in commercial spaceflight. After all, astronauts typically have to be in tip-top shape. But opening the door to the paying public means that less healthy individuals will soon have access to space, too. And the stress of spaceflight, combined with the negative effects of weightlessness on muscle and bone, could cause real problems. It may be up to your personal physician to make the go/no-go call based on your medical history. Among the potential hypotheticals floated in the BMJ study, can my patient with stable angina and a pacemaker for complete heart block participate in a suborbital Virgin Galactic flight? What is the maximum allowable time that my patient with osteoporosis can spend on a planned vacation at a space hotel? There are no official answers, yet. But the study's authors note that such questions may be in the air, or lack thereof, in the not-too-distant future. Ladybugs love to snack on aphids and other pests. So people began importing an Asian species, called the harlequin ladybird, as natural pest control. But in their new environments, the harlequins wiped out native ladybugs. And they have their parasites to thank. That's according to research in the journal Science. A parasite called Microsporidia lies dormant in the circulatory systems of harlequin ladybirds. But when scientists injected Microsporidia into a common European ladybug species, the insects died within 2 weeks. When the ladybugs were injected with dead Microsporidia or a control substance, most survived. Harlequin ladybirds' immune systems, on the other hand, have learned to deal with Microsporidia, which lets the insects use them as biological weapons. Because one way ladybugs compete is by consuming the eggs and larvae of rival species. When European ladybug species eat the harlequin ladybird eggs and larvae, they also consume the Microsporidia and die. The discovery demonstrates an important role of immunity in evolutionary selection, and it shows that there are many ways to lose a food fight. It's a given that most babies wear diapers, in Western cultures anyway. But diapers may trap more than waste, they may also confine a baby's ability to walk. Scientists compared the walking gaits of 60 babies who were either naked, wore a thin disposable diaper, or a thick cloth diaper. Half the babies were 13-month-old novice walkers and the other half 19-month-old experienced walkers. When the 13-month-olds walked naked, only 10 fell. But while wearing the cloth diaper 21 of them fell, and while wearing the disposable 17 of them fell. Among the 19-month-olds only 4 fell while naked or wearing disposables, while 8 fell when wearing cloth diapers. But both age groups took wider and shorter steps while wearing diapers as opposed to walking naked. The research is in the journal Developmental Science. The study cannot predict if wearing diapers has a long-term impact. Nonetheless, the researchers believe walking naked would speed up walking development, but then we are left with the issue of covering the entire house in plastic and relying heavily on the child's ability to communicate his or her elimination intentions. Unless you're at a Chaucer convention, speaking Middle English is not going to impress a potential romantic partner in 2013. Similarly, male savanna sparrows have to make sure their vocalizations are up to date. Researchers analyzed 3 decades of recordings of male savanna sparrows. And birds that changed their tune over the years did better with the ladies. The research is in the journal Animal Behavior. While introductory notes of the sparrow's song stayed the same, the middle and end parts changed over time. In the 1980s, songs concluded with longer, high-pitched trills. More recent songs contain a series of clicks in the middle and a shorter, low-pitched trill at the end. Researchers found that the male sparrows that adopted the newer songs had higher rates of sexual reproduction. Because you don't want to be seen as behind the times. Indeed, Chaucer might have had his pick of the ladies in the 14th century. But few today can make heads or tails of his tales. In planet formation, as in adolescence, you've got your late bloomers. Such is the case for a nearby star called TW Hydrae. At some 3 million to 10 million years of age, it's relatively old for a young star. That is, TW Hydrae formed much more recently than our Sun, but is past the point at which most fledgling stars are still encircled by a massive disk of dust and gas, the stuff of planet formation. But a new analysis shows that TW Hydrae retains a surprisingly hefty circumstellar disk, implying that the star could still be forming giant planets. The study appears in the journal Nature. Researchers from the US, Germany, and the Netherlands pointed the European Space Agency's orbiting Herschel Space Observatory at TW Hydrae to investigate the star's disk. They detected a heavy hydrogen molecule, called hydrogen deuteride. From that measurement, they were able to estimate the abundance of ordinary hydrogen, which makes up the bulk of the disk. The result, TW Hydra still has enough raw material left to make 60 Jupiters or so, despite its maturity. For aging stars, then, perhaps 10 million is the new 30. Roosters greet the rising sun with crowing sound. But they also crow at other times. So are they responding to the light? Or do they simply know that it's morning? New research says the latter. Roosters crow because of internal time cues. The finding is in the journal Current Biology. Scientists controlled the light levels in rooster habitats. For 2 weeks, the birds experienced 12 hours of light followed by 12 hours of dim light. Consistent with the pre-dawn noises observed in wildfowl, the roosters began to crow about 2 hours before their rooms lit up. Then, for 2 weeks, the roosters lived in constant dim light. Yet they continued to crow about once a day, at intervals of 23.7 hours to be precise. Even without morning light, their circadian rhythms told them when dawn should be breaking. The birds also crowed in response to sudden light, and to the sounds of other roosters. But they were more likely to react when those stimuli occurred near dawn. Showing that you can't really keep a rooster in the dark about the time. Advertising and media companies often get lobbied to use models that represent the average woman's body, rather than ultra-thin models, whose images may influence some women to have an unhealthy relationship with food. Now a study supports that idea that observed images affect what people consider to be acceptable body types. The report is in the journal PLOS One. Researchers surveyed subjects about their opinions of their own bodies and those of others. Then they presented the subjects with photos of large or thin women. Some photos were of beauty queens in evening gowns or other high-status clothing. Other photos were of women who were either very large or very thin, wearing neutral gray leotards. Following those viewings, the subjects were again surveyed about their body preferences. Subjects who originally preferred thin bodies only increased their preference for thinness after being shown photos of thin women. But they decreased their preference for thin bodies after being shown photos of larger women, and the attire of the women in the photos made no difference to the subject's latter preference. The researchers say that this study provides strong evidence that images of female bodies promoted by the media and ad agencies could have a real impact on women's preference and subsequent thoughts about body type. People with asthma, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and other breathing disorders need fast relief when their airways tighten up. Unfortunately, the most commonly used medication has obnoxious side effects. But scientists recently discovered that a bitter taste can be a more effective treatment, and now they know why. The work is published in PLOS Biology. When an asthma attack hits, the airway shrinks and makes breathing difficult. To keep air flowing, the sufferer must take medication to relax the passage's muscles and open it back up. But a couple years ago, researchers discovered airways contain bitter taste receptors like the ones on the tongue. After exposure to bitter substances, the receptors can expand the airway more quickly and more effectively than the most commonly used treatment. Researchers examined airway tissue to learn why bitterness makes the muscles relax. During an asthma attack, calcium flows into the cells of the airway and contributes to muscle contraction. But bitter substances block the channels that allow calcium into cells, which relaxes the tightened tissue. And that's the opposite of a bitter pill. A lot of people just don't feel quite human without that morning cup of coffee. Now a study finds that the enhanced sense of well-being that caffeine can cause is reflected in our perception of words. Specifically, caffeine increases the ability to recognize words associated with positive thoughts, but doesn't provide the same boost for words with negative or even neutral associations. The research is in the journal PLOS One. Scientists assigned 66 subjects to one of two groups. Half got a 200 mg caffeine tablet, a dose equal to almost 3 cups of coffee. The other half received a sugar tablet. 30 minutes later, the volunteers were shown strings of letters, and had to decide as fast as they could if a string formed a word or was just gibberish. The volunteers recognized words with positive associations much faster than either negative or neutral words. Other studies have shown that positive words tend to be recognized more quickly, but the caffeine increases the gap. So next time you wake up with a grumpy sweetheart, your compliments might be appreciated more if they have a cup of coffee first. I think what is most remarkable about Dexter is his capacity for stress management. Michael Chill, in a conversation about his TV character at the Rubin Museum of Art in New York City on October 24, he spoke with psychologist Kevin Dutton, author of The Wisdom of Psychopaths. And I think that's because of his ability to, as the heat goes up, his internal temperature goes down. The crazier things get, the cooler he feels. He almost craves chaos. He seems to attract it, cultivate it, encourage it, because it's the only thing that somehow soothes him. Yeah, it's very realistic actually, because what you find is that the more chaotic a situation, the more that psychopaths have to make decisions under pressure, the better their decision-making gets. And we've seen it with Dexter, the more the pressure builds, the cooler he gets. And that is exactly what you see with psychopaths, it really is. Beneath its adorable exterior, is your cat hiding the heart of a killer? Researchers now estimate that each year, domestic cats kill billions of birds and mammals in the United States alone. The report is in Nature Communications. We already knew that domestic cats can wreak havoc on islands, causing 14% of species extinctions and ranking as one of the world's 100 worst invasive species. But now, scientists have reviewed previous studies to find just how much damage cats do on the mainland. Cats kill some 1.4 to 3.7 billion birds and 6.9 to 20.7 billion small mammals in the U.S. each year. These numbers mean that felines may be the biggest human-related cause of death for American birds and mammals. And cats tend to prey on native species, which can cause major ecosystem damage. The worst feline killers are those without owners, and reducing feral cat populations is an ongoing problem. But you can still reduce the impact of domestic cats by keeping your pet indoors, thus leaving the neighborhood a little less red in tooth and claw. Last week on the podcast we talked about space health. Specifically, we told you about a new paper discussing the role that physicians will have to play in determining which citizens are fit enough for commercial jaunts into space. Now let's leap ahead, and much farther afield. What kinds of issues might a crew of astronauts face on a longer journey, say, a round trip to Mars? To find out, 6 volunteers spent a record 520 days confined to a simulated space habitat near Moscow. They emerged in 2011. Now a report in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences shows that the simulated spaceflight did have real effects. Removed from natural light and the rhythms of everyday life, 4 crew members experienced some type of sleep disturbance. And 1 exhibited signs of chronic sleep deprivation during regular alertness tests. Overall, the crew also became more sedentary with time. The researchers conclude that a real Mars mission would need to incorporate tactics such as timed light exposure or exercise to keep astronauts' circadian rhythms on beat, because it would be a bad idea to land on Mars sleepy and out of shape. The Curiosity rover has achieved plenty of firsts in its 6 months on Mars. And the last first is especially noteworthy. On February 9, Curiosity made the inaugural run of its drill, boring into a rock to extract a sample from the interior. It thus became the first robot ever to drill on Mars. Curiosity has now gotten some use from most of its science instruments, but not all of them are working. At a conference at UCLA, Deputy Project Scientist Ashwin Basu explained that problems are facing the rover's wind and humidity sensors. The humidity sensor is being calibrated. They think it's going to produce some good data, it's measuring a good signal. It's just the physical units don't quite make sense right now. Worse is the wind sensor, damaged during the rover's landing. The wind sensor is actually 6 different sensors. We lost 2 of them during landing, and the other 4 are proving pretty hard to interpret as well. So we actually have no wind data yet. A few glitches are to be expected. After all, the Curiosity rover, with its unprecedented size and complexity, is a first in and of itself. Medicinal tablets are nothing new. Doctors have been dispensing pills for thousands of years. And now archaeologists have turned up some of those ancient medicines, which were preserved in a shipwreck for close to 2 millennia. The 2nd century Pozzino wreck was discovered in 1974 off the coast of Italy. Its cargo included medical equipment like a cupping vessel, iron probe, and tin boxes of supplies. And in one of those boxes, researchers recovered 5 gray tablets. Now, they've analyzed the antique medication. The work is in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. The pills primarily contain zinc compounds, probably the active medicinal ingredients. But researchers also detected starch, pollen, charcoal, fats, and linen fibers. Those fibers help the tablets hold their round, loaf-like shape, which may be the key to the medication's use. The Greek word meaning small round loaves also inspired the word collyrium, or eye wash. The pills were probably either dissolved in liquid or ground into a powder and used to treat eye conditions. Who knows, maybe Hippocrates used them on his pupils. Kids today may be more familiar with the sound of a rushing highway than a rushing river. But imagine that the internal combustion engine could be set aside and we could design the soundscape of our future. What oral environment would you choose for traffic? For the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, the answer is that new cars should sound like old cars. Hybrid and electric vehicles can be so quiet that people outside the vehicle can't hear them. So these 2 quiet cars will be required to sound something like this. The Obama administration wants 1 million electric vehicles on the road by 2015. Slow sales of cars like the Chevy Volt and Tesla Model S may keep that number from being reached. But there are still hundreds of thousands of EVs and hybrids on the road today. It's hoped that the new rule will help prevent thousands of pedestrian and cyclist deaths. But the rule also hews to a possibly outdated tradition, like people who set their cell phone ringtone to sound like an old rotary phone. And it's wasting a chance to reimagine what our cars, roads, and even cities could sound like. When you don't clean your plate, microbes feast. And Americans are awfully good at feeding microbes, wasting some 222 million metric tons of food a year. That's a quarter of our food. Much of that wasted food ends up in garbage dumps, turned by microbes into methane, a powerful greenhouse gas and one of the primary culprits behind global warming. Now government officials in Massachusetts would like to ensure that restaurants, universities, hospitals, and other large institutions don't exacerbate that problem. The idea is to make sure all that wasted food doesn't end up in landfills, but instead becomes either compost or energy. The same microbes that turn food into methane in a landfill can turn food into methane in a biodigester, and that methane can then be used as a fuel. More importantly, from the Bay State's perspective, it will keep the state's landfills from filling up. Of course, the methane from landfills can also be harvested, and often is. And, as the Pilgrims knew, it would be even smarter not to waste the food in the first place. But let's give thanks for another helping of new ways to curb climate change. An Arctic storm tore a drilling rig loose from its tow ship and forced it aground near Alaska's Kodiak Island this week. Just a few months ago, the rig and another began preliminary drilling of the first offshore oil wells in the Arctic. Shell's efforts to drill in the Beaufort and Chukchi seas have been plagued by problems. But that's just part of the cost of doing energy business in this new era. Consider drilling rig operator Transocean, which agreed to pay the U.S. government $1.4 billion this week for its part in the disastrous 3-month-long blowout in the Gulf of Mexico in 2010. Meanwhile, the thirst for oil drives the mining of tar sands in Alberta and the flooding of old wells with steam or CO2 in California and Texas. And, of course, there's the accelerating accumulation of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere from all that fossil fuel burning. The resulting climate change is part of what makes drilling for oil offshore in the unfreezing Arctic possible, just as it has opened once mythical shipping routes such as the Northwest and Northeast Passages. That's a positive feedback loop with negative consequences.